Hello everyone and welcome on the Papier de Rêve channel. I'm Ursula and today I will be painting with you a pine trunk. This video is a sort of following from my video of 2 weeks ago of a portrait of a pine tree. I just wanted to work a little bit more on the texture of the trunk on this tree because it's a very interesting texture, a very strong texture, and I wanted to play a little bit with watercolor, trying to mimic this texture on the paper. So I'm starting this painting by painting the trunk first. I'm adding this mix of indigo and burnt sienna in the middle of my page, quite roughly because details will come a bit later. Right now I just want to focus myself on placing the right color at the right place, getting the bigger shape of what I want to paint without thinking too much for details right now. So I'm adding a little bit of greenery at the top with a mix of indigo and Aussie red gold, and at the bottom there is some kind of foliage going up the trunk, and I paint it with a mix of indigo still, but mixed with nickel azo yellow, so that I have 2 tones of greens because there is 2 different foliage right here. And once I'm satisfied with my color placement, I will start to work on the texture of this particular trunk. It's a really heavy texture, and I want to mimic that, and for that I'm using just some simple plastic wrap on top of my wet paper, and I'm adding a lot of pigments and water under the plastic wrap in order to flow in all the little ridges of the plastic wrap that will make a very dense pigment in this area, and it will look quite strong at the end. And it's quite easy to do. You just have to load your brush with pigments and water, and then place your brush under the plastic wrap and squeeze it on the paper so that it delivers all the water and pigment. And you can also move the paper and make the gravity helps you to move all those pigments in all the ridges of the plastic wrap. And once I'm satisfied with this layer, I will let it dry totally. And of course you have to let it dry quite a long time, because when there is plastic wrap on top of the paper takes a long time to dry. Once this first layer has totally dry, you can see 2 things clearly on the paper. My colors have dried a lot lighter than I put them at first on my paper, but that's okay. That's a characteristic of watercolor, and I know it. But there is also something interesting that have happened under the plastic wrap, where I mix a lot of burnt sienna and indigo. The burnt sienna is still on top of the paper, and it's quite strong in those areas where there was a lot of pigments, and the indigo disappeared a little bit in those areas. I think it's quite nice because it adds to the texture, and I'm really happy from this happy accident on my paper. So for this second layer, I will focus my work on adding again all the colors from the needles at the top, from the leaves at the bottom, the leaves of the ivy, and I will starting to work a little bit more on the texture of the trunk, and starting to add depth in this area. For the needles, I'm using my dagger shape brush, just because there is it has some long hair, and it's a very flimsy brush, so it's a perfect tool for making fine lines with a lot of randomness to it, and it's quite fun also to use. And I'm also using the same mix for the greens. So at the top, Indigo mixed with Aussie Red Gold, and at the bottom, Indigo mixed with Nickel Azure Yellow. I like these two tones of greens. I think they are very neat in this painting, and I love how Indigo make greens when you mix it with some yellows. They are not as vibrant as with another blue. They are a little bit dull, but maybe a little bit more natural also. For the trunk, I'm adding some darker colors to the bark of the tree. For that, I'm using always the same mix, Indigo with burnt sienna. And I'm trying to follow the shape that were made with the plastic wrap, so that there is a unity in my painting, and these shapes are like a model for the bark. So I'm following those marks, and I'm adding a darker color where I need them to be. On all the higher part of the bark, I'm adding a little bit of lavender in order to get a different tone here, and add an idea of light shining through the foliage onto the bark, and lighting up all the higher part of the bark. And I will let this layer dry and talk you through my supplies. For the brushes, I'm using an Escoda Último number 18 and a Rosemary Co serie 39 half an inch. For the colors, I'm using Nickel Azure Yellow, Aussie Red Gold, burnt sienna, lavender, and indigo. And my paper today is from Aussie in hot pressed. So for the third and last layer, I wanted to add a little bit more contrast in some area, because right now it feels that everything is on the same level of contrast, and that's not very interesting. I want some darker part in this painting, so that the lighter part will show a little bit lighter too by contrast. So again, I'm painting in all the hollow of the bark with my mix of indigo and burnt sienna, but this time with a finer brush, so that there is some layer of darkness going a little bit darker and darker when the bark is with more depth in those areas. I will add also another layer in the needles of the tree, just because it's fun. Let's face it, I love doing that because I can play with my brush. I do not have to think too much about it. I just have to pay attention and make fine lines onto the paper. And I will add also another layer in the ivy at the bottom of my image, just because right now they are not very visible, and I just want to make them appear a little bit better. This was a really fun painting to make, because there is a lot of texture going on, and it's quite fun to work with plastic wrap. The plastic wrap does all the work for you. You do not have to think too much about it. So I like that for sometimes, and it was a great exercise to make a really particular texture with watercolor. And I'm sure I will use this texture again and refine it also, because it's a little bit rough right now, but it was an experimentation, and I'm really happy how it turned out, because I just achieved my goal, that was painting a bark from a pine tree. And this video is now ending. Thanks for watching, and I hope you like it. Please check the blog post for more information about it, and tell me what you think in the comments. See you soon.